Chapter 1. The Shattered Melody. The air in my kitchen was thick with the sweet scent of apples and cinnamon. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating golden dust motes dancing over the time-worn oak floor. I was humming an old tune from my youth, a song that Robert, my late husband, had adored. My hands, though wrinkled with age, moved with practiced ease as I pulled my famous apple pie from the oven. The crust was a perfect burnished gold, promising a cozy afternoon with my son, David, who was visiting tomorrow. David had always been my pride and joy. My only son, the child upon whom I had poured all my love, especially after Robert passed. For the last 3 years, the grief of losing my husband was a constant, dull ache, but David and my daughter-in-law, Claire, along with my daughter, Sarah, were my reason to keep going. At least, that's what I had thought. Just as I set the pie on a wire rack to cool, my phone on the kitchen counter chimed, a voicemail notification. I smiled, assuming it was David calling to confirm his arrival time for tomorrow. Wiping my hands on my apron, I reached for the phone and pressed play. But the voice that filled my kitchen was not the warm greeting I expected. It was David's voice, yes, but it was laced with an irritation and malice I had never heard directed at me. "I can't stand this useless old hag anymore, Claire. Soon she'll be taking her final nap, and will be spending all her money in Paris." Each word was a sharp shard of ice driving straight into my heart. The fragrant apple pie suddenly seemed meaningless. The tune I was humming died on my lips. My warm, cozy kitchen felt as cold as a tomb. The blood in my veins turned to ice. David had sent the message to the wrong person. A foolish mistake that had just exposed a monstrous truth. I stood frozen, the phone in my hand feeling like a venomous snake. Useless old hag. Final nap. Spending all her money. The words echoed in my mind, each repetition more painful than the last. Was this David? The son for whom I had just baked his favorite pie? The son who, just last week, had hugged me and said he was worried about my health? My hands didn't shake. Strangely, a cold, steely calm washed over me. The overwhelming pain didn't manifest as tears, but crystallized into something hard and resolute. 3 years of widowhood had taught me to be strong, but I never imagined I'd have to use that strength against my own flesh and blood. I played the message again, and then again, to be certain I hadn't misheard, to burn this betrayal into my memory. David's voice was still there, clear and cruel. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were already planning the celebration on my grave. A hotel in Paris. They had already picked it out. I walked to the window, looking out at the rose garden Robert had planted with his own hands. The roses were still in bloom, vibrant and proud, oblivious to the storm that had just broken inside my home. "Oh, Robert, my love," I whispered to his memory. "It looks like it's time to use the plan we talked about." The plan. We had discussed it during his final months, as cancer was relentlessly claiming his life. Lying in his hospital bed, his thin hand holding mine tightly, he'd said, "Maggie, people change when money's involved, even family. Promise me you'll protect yourself." I had promised, though deep down I never believed I would need to use it against David and Sarah. But Robert, my pragmatic and far-sighted husband, had anticipated this. He knew that grief could be accompanied by greed. I returned to the counter and put my cell phone down. I picked up the landline receiver and dialed a number I had committed to memory, but had always hoped never to use. It rang twice before a voice answered. "James Morrison." "Jim, it's me, Margaret," I said, my voice steady, betraying no emotion. "Margaret, is everything all right?" Jim's voice, the voice of Robert's best friend and lawyer for 30 years, was filled with concern. "Jim, do you remember our conversation back in July? About the special provisions Robert wanted to put in place, in case of an emergency?" There was a pause on the other end. I could picture Jim sitting up straighter in his office, his expression turning serious. "Are you saying, it's time?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "It's time. Put the plan into action." I understand, Margaret. I'll make the necessary calls. Everything will be in motion by morning. After hanging up, I looked around my kitchen. The pie sat on the counter, golden and perfect, but now it felt like a monument to my own foolishness. Tomorrow, David would arrive expecting his loving, gullible mother to serve him his favorite dessert and probably ask for another small loan to help with his mortgage. Instead, he was going to discover that this useless old hag had been 3 steps ahead of him all along. My phone buzzed again. A text from Claire this time. Looking forward to tomorrow. David can't wait for your famous apple pie. For the first time since hearing that voicemail, I smiled. A cold, mirthless smile. Oh, sweetheart, I thought. Neither of you has any idea what's coming. Chapter 2, The Forgotten Signs. Grief has a strange way of clouding one's judgment. Looking back, the signs were all there, as obvious as red flags in a snowstorm, but I had chosen to ignore them, telling myself it was just the concern of children for their widowed mother. The change in David began subtly, right after Robert's funeral. Amidst the somber reception, David pulled me aside. "Mom, you know Claire and I are here for you," he'd said, his arm around my shoulders. That hug, I now realized, felt hollow. "But this house is so big for just one person. Have you thought about downsizing?" At the time, I dismissed it as simple concern. My sweet David worried about his aging mother rattling around in a large 4-bedroom home. How thoughtful. I brushed it off, telling him the house held too many memories of his father. Then their visits began to feel more like inspections. Claire would walk around, commenting on the antique furniture. "Oh, Margaret, your grandmother's china cabinet is exquisite. It must be worth a fortune." David would nod along, asking casual questions about property values and inheritance taxes. They disguised their probing curiosity as small talk. Last month, they arrived with a stack of glossy brochures for high-end senior living communities, Sunset Manor, Golden Years Estates. The names were pleasant, but to me they sounded like luxury prisons. "Look at this one, Mom," Claire chirped, pointing to photos of seniors doing chair yoga and watercolor painting. "You'd make so many friends, and no more worrying about cooking or cleaning." The final straw, though I didn't recognize it then, came 3 weeks ago when David suggested I meet with a friend of his, a financial advisor. "Just to make sure your nest egg is being managed properly, you wouldn't want to outlive your money, would you?" Outlive your money? As if I were some doddering fool who couldn't balance a checkbook. I had managed our family's finances for 37 years, while Robert focused on his dental practice. Now I understood their urgency. They weren't worried about my finances. They were worried about how quickly they could get their hands on them. That night, after speaking with Jim, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder labeled Important Documents. Inside were copies of everything: my will, Robert's life insurance policy, property deeds, investment accounts. Everything David and Claire thought they knew. But what they didn't know was in a different folder, locked in the safe. That was where Robert and I had detailed the protection plan. "People get strange around death and money, Maggie," Robert had warned me during one of his chemo sessions. "Even family, especially family." He had insisted we set up legal mechanisms, trusts, and fail-safes that would activate if anyone tried to take advantage of me. At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. Now I realized he had been prescient. My phone rang. It was Sarah, my daughter. "Hi, Mom. How are you holding up?" Sarah's voice carried the same manufactured concern as David's, but somehow it felt more rehearsed. "I'm fine, honey. Actually, David is coming over tomorrow." "Oh," Sarah sounded surprised. "He didn't mention that when we talked yesterday." Interesting. So my children had been conferring behind my back. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Mom." "Have you and David been talking about my living situation?" A long silence stretched over the line. Then a carefully worded reply. "We're just worried about you, Mom. Being all alone in that big house, managing everything." There it was, the same script David had been reading from. "I see, And I suppose you both have suggestions for what I should do. Well, Sarah's voice grew smaller. There are some really nice communities where you could have help when you need it, but still maintain your independence. Independence. They kept using that word, but what they meant was the exact opposite. They wanted to strip my independence away. After I hung up, I sat down in Robert's old recliner, the one I'd kept exactly as he'd left it. His presence seemed to linger in the room. Even my daughter was in on it. Both my children, circling like vultures, waiting for their inheritance. Tomorrow's visit was not going to be a social call. It was going to be a lesson, a very expensive lesson for all of them. Chapter 3. The Clumsy Charade. The next morning was crisp and clear, a perfect day for what I had planned. At precisely 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, schooling my features into the image of a gentle, perhaps lonely mother, and opened the door. David and Claire stood on the porch, both wearing the kind of smiles you see at funeral homes, sympathetic but slightly impatient. "Mom!" David stepped forward and wrapped me in a stiff, rehearsed hug. "You look wonderful." Claire presented a bouquet of cheap grocery store daisies. "These are for you, Margaret. David told me how much you love daisies." I've been allergic to daisies for 20 years, a small but telling detail of their superficial concern. Still, I smiled and thanked her. "Thank you, dear. They're lovely." Some battles weren't worth fighting just yet. Come in, I've made coffee." They settled into my living room. I watched as their eyes roamed, not appreciating the familiar space, but appraising it, cataloguing its contents. Claire's gaze lingered on my grandmother's antique china cabinet. David studied the family photos on the wall, as if memorizing which ones he would keep after the clean-out. After we exhausted the small talk about the weather, David got down to business. "So, Mom, Claire and I have been doing a lot of thinking about your situation here." "My situation?" I asked innocently, pouring coffee with a hand that was surprisingly steady. "Well, being alone, managing this big house, all the responsibilities." "What responsibilities are those, David?" He exchanged a quick message-laden glance with Claire. The yard work, maintenance, grocery shopping, managing your medications." "I don't take any medications except for vitamins." "Right, but as you get older..." "I'm 64, David, not 94. Claire leaned forward, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Of course you're still so young and capable, Margaret, but wouldn't it be nice to have help? To live somewhere where you don't have to worry about a thing?" This time they brought new brochures, glossier and more expensive, with words like luxury and resort-style living. "Look at this one," David said, spreading the most opulent brochure across my coffee table. "Meadowbrook Estates. It's got a golf course, 3 restaurants, and they handle everything: cleaning, cooking, even transportation to appointments." I picked up the brochure, feigning interest. The numbers made me raise an eyebrow. "The monthly fees start at $8,000. This looks expensive." "That's the beauty of it," Claire said, her eyes lighting up. "You'd sell this house, and the proceeds would cover years of living there, worry-free." Ah, there it was. The endgame. "Sell the house," I repeated, "and what happens to the money that's left over? When I pass away?" Another glance between them. "Well," David said carefully, "whatever's left would go to your beneficiaries, as outlined in your will." "I see. And you've read my will?" "Not exactly read it, but we know the basics. Sarah and I inherit everything equally, right? That's what you and Dad always told us." I set my coffee cup down on the saucer with a definitive click. "Actually, that's changed." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Changed?" Claire's voice cracked slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've updated my will. Several times, actually, since your father died." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, you should have discussed major financial decisions with us. We could have helped you understand the implications." "Oh, I understand the implications perfectly," I said. I stood, walked to my desk, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "In fact, I have copies right here if you'd like to review them." Claire was clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "Margaret, surely you don't need to make any drastic changes. Your original will was perfectly reasonable." "Drastic?" I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting choice of words." David stood up abruptly. "Mom, I think we should all take a step back here. You're clearly upset about something, and making permanent legal changes when you're emotional isn't wise." "Emotional?" I almost laughed. "David, I haven't felt this clear-headed in years." At that exact moment, my phone rang. James Morrison, right on schedule. "Excuse me," I said to them and answered the call. "Margaret Thompson speaking." I made sure my voice was loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Mrs. Thompson, this is James Morrison. I'm calling to confirm that all the documents we discussed have been filed and executed as of this morning. Everything is now legally binding and in effect." "Thank you, Jim. I'm so glad we were able to implement my late husband's protection plan." After I hung up, the silence in the room was taut, like a stretched wire. "Protection plan?" David's voice was carefully controlled. "What kind of protection plan?" I smiled, settling back into my chair. The kind that activates when someone tries to take advantage of a vulnerable widow. And then I held up my cell phone, and I pressed play. David's own voice filled the living room, clear and hideous. "I can't stand this useless old hag anymore. Soon, she'll be taking her final nap, and will be spending all her money in Paris." The color drained from David's face, leaving it a pasty, grayish white. Claire gasped audibly, staring at her husband as if seeing him for the first time, though I knew she was a party to that conversation. When the recording ended, the silence was so profound, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Mom, I can explain," David stammered. "Can you?" I kept my voice pleasant, conversational. "Because I am very interested to hear you explain discussing my death as an inconvenience that's taking too long." The game was now truly afoot. Chapter 4. The Naked Truth. "That's not what I meant," David said quickly, panic flickering in his eyes. "I was frustrated, talking to Claire about worrying about you living alone. It just came out wrong." Claire, recovering from her initial shock, jumped in to play her part. "Yes, Margaret, it was taken completely out of context. David has been so stressed about your well-being." "My well-being?" I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air. "Well, tell me, when exactly did you two book the trip to Paris?" The question landed like a physical blow. David's eyes darted to Claire, who had suddenly become fascinated with her manicure. "We haven't booked anything," David finally said. I picked up my phone and showed them a screenshot. "This is from Claire's Instagram, posted 3 days ago. Can't wait for our romantic Paris getaway. Finally booked the hotel we've been dreaming about." Claire's face went through several interesting shades of red before settling on a pale, sickly white. That's for our anniversary next year." "Your anniversary is in March," I countered, leaving them no room to maneuver. "This post talks about a trip in September, next month." David slumped back onto the sofa, running his hands through his hair. "Okay. Yes, we booked a trip, but it's not what you think." "What I think," I interrupted, my voice now losing its gentle tone and taking on the cold edge of steel, "is that you've been planning to celebrate my death with a vacation. What I think is that you've been pushing me toward expensive senior living to drain my assets faster. What I think is that I raised a son who sees his mother as an obstacle to his inheritance." "That's not fair," David's voice rose. "Do you have any idea what it's like watching your mother live alone, knowing something could happen to her? Do you know the stress we've been under?" "The stress you've been under?" I stood up, anger coursing through me like an electric current. "The stress of wondering when I'll die so you can spend my money." Claire started to cry. Whether they were real tears or performance tears, with her, it was hard to tell. "Margaret, please, we love you. We're just worried about you. Maybe we handled it badly, but our hearts are in the right place." "Your hearts are in my bank account." David stood up too, his face flushed. "Fine. You want honesty?" "Yes. We are concerned about your finances. Yes, we've made some plans based on what we thought our inheritance would be. Yes, we think you're too stubborn to admit you need help, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. Doesn't it? Your father would have wanted us to look out for you. Family takes care of each other. Your father did want you to look out for me, I said, my voice sharp. That's why he made sure I would be protected. From you. David's face twisted. Protected from us? We're your children. And yet here you are, plotting behind my back, discussing my demise over voicemails you thought I'd never hear. Claire wiped her eyes with a tissue. What exactly does this protection plan mean? I smiled, a smile devoid of any warmth, and pulled the legal documents from their envelope. It means that, as of this morning, everything has changed. I spread the documents across the coffee table. My will, my trusts, my beneficiaries, all of it updated based on a contingency plan your father and I established before he died. A contingency plan for what? David demanded. For this exact situation, for the possibility that grief and greed might make my children forget that I am a person, not a payout. David snatched the papers, his eyes scanning them frantically. As he read, his face went from red to pale to a deathly grey. This can't be legal, he whispered. Oh, it's perfectly legal. Your father made sure of it. Claire was reading over his shoulder now, her tears forgotten. What does it say, David? His voice was hollow when he answered. It says we get nothing. Nothing? Claire's voice cracked. Not a penny? Not a penny, I confirmed cheerfully. Every asset, every account, every dime. It all goes to charity if either of my children attempts to manipulate, coerce, or take advantage of me in any way. The trigger clause was met this morning, thanks to this conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, David looked up at me, his eyes blazing. You can't do this. We have rights. What rights are those, David? The right to a blind inheritance regardless of your behavior. We're your family. You deserve exactly what you have earned, I said calmly. And based on today's conversation and your voicemail, that appears to be nothing. Claire stood up abruptly. This is insane. We're leaving. Good idea, I agreed. And Claire, you might want to cancel that trip to Paris. The cancellation fee is probably much cheaper than what you've just lost. After they left, slamming the door behind them, I sat in my quiet house. For the first time in hours, the silence wasn't threatening. It was like a cleansing bath, washing away the filth of their deception. My hands were no longer shaking. My heart was no longer racing. For the first time since Robert died, I felt completely in control. Chapter 5. The play continues. It took less than 20 minutes for the phone to ring. Sarah. Mom, David just called me. He's furious. He said you've cut him and Claire completely out of the will. David says a lot of things, doesn't he? I replied coolly. Did he also tell you about the voicemail he accidentally sent me? Another silence. Then a cautious, what voicemail? I played it for her too. When it finished, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I had no idea David felt that way about you. Didn't you, Sarah? Because he mentioned that you two had discussed my living situation quite thoroughly. Another pause. We've talked about our concerns, yes, but I would never refer to you that way. What way, Sarah? Like I'm a burden? Like you're just waiting for me to die? No, Mom, how can you even ask that? Sarah sounded genuinely shocked, because for the past 6 months, both of my children have been pushing me toward expensive assisted living, asking about my finances, and making plans that assume I won't be around much longer. What exactly am I supposed to think, Sarah? We're worried about you. You're living alone in a house that's too big. You never go anywhere. You don't date. I'm a widow, Sarah. I lost the love of my life. Forgive me if I'm not ready to sign up for ballroom dancing classes and singles mixers. Sarah's voice softened. I know, Mom. I know how much you love Dad. But he wouldn't want you to stop living. I haven't stopped living. I've simply started living on my own terms instead of everyone else's expectations. And the will stands. Both you and David have shown me exactly how much I can trust you with my future. The answer is, not at all. Mom, please, she pleaded. I understand why you're upset with David. That message was horrible. But I've never said anything like that about you. I've never wished you would die so I could inherit your money. She was right. Sarah had never been as crude as David. She was simply a more subtle accomplice. Sarah, when David suggested I move to assisted living, what did you tell him? A long pause. I said, I thought it might be a good idea for your safety and social life. And when he talked about managing my finances, I said, maybe we should encourage her to be more conservative with her investments. More conservative meaning what? More accessible? Easier to manage when I'm too old to manage them myself? You're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Or am I finally hearing the words you've been dancing around for months? Sarah started to cry then. I love you, Mom. I do. But I also have children to think about, college tuitions, mortgage payments. I thought having a better understanding of our future inheritance would help us plan better. There it was. The truth wrapped in pretty paper, but still the truth. Your future inheritance, I repeated. Not my present life, but your future windfall. That's not fair. Fair? I almost laughed. Sarah, fair would have been my children visiting me because they missed me, not because they wanted to assess my assets. Fair would have been phone calls asking how I'm feeling, not how I'm managing my money. We do care how you're feeling. No, you care how long you think I have left. The silence between us stretched like a chasm. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice small. What happens now? Now, I said, you both learn to love me for who I am, not for what I'm worth. Or you learn to live without either. The will is final. The protection plan is in effect. If either of you makes any further attempts to manipulate my living situation, my finances, or my decisions, every penny goes to charity. Mom, you can't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. After I hung up, I walked to my kitchen and looked at David's pie, still sitting on the counter where I'd left it that morning. It had been his favorite since he was 7. I'd made it with love, anticipating his smile. Now it felt like a monument to my own foolishness. I picked up the pie and walked outside to my garden. The compost bin was near the back fence, next to Robert's roses. As I dumped the perfect pie into the organic waste, I felt something shift inside me. The old Margaret would have saved it, would have wrapped it carefully for the next visit, hoping things would get better. The old Margaret would have made excuses for her children's behavior and blamed herself for misunderstanding them. The new Margaret was done making excuses for people who saw her as a walking inheritance. Chapter 6. Deeper Secrets. 3 days later, David showed up on my doorstep early in the morning, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He came to apologize, a seemingly sincere apology. He confessed to their financial struggles, to the desperation and greed that had clouded his judgment. He said that hearing his own voice on that recording made him sick to his stomach. I listened, without interruption. I studied my son's tired face, searching for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and what looked like genuine regret. Mom, what can I do to fix this? He asked. I'm not sure you can, I told him. Trust isn't like a broken vase you can glue back together. Once it's shattered, there are always cracks. I gave him a path forward. Start by accepting that the will isn't changing, that the money is off the table. Call me because you miss me, not because you need something. Visit because you enjoy my company, not to assess my competency. Prove to me that you value our relationship more than my bank account. He asked if there was any chance I might change my mind about the will. Ask me again in a year, I said. After you've shown me you can love me without expecting anything in return. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. But that hope was extinguished 2 weeks later when Sarah arrived with a casserole in what she probably thought was a brilliant strategy. After some phony pleasantries, she launched into her speech. I've been thinking, and I realize, instead of talking about your future care, maybe we should be talking about your present happiness. You mentioned wanting to travel, to take classes. Maybe instead of worrying about conserving money, you should be spending it on experiences. A complete 180 from the woman who was concerned about my conservative investment strategy just a few weeks ago. I looked my daughter straight in the eye. Sarah, do you know what your father used to say about you? He said you were the most dangerous kind of smart. Smart enough to tell people what they wanted to hear so convincingly that they forgot to look at your real motives. I continued, this newfound support for my spending, does it have anything to do with the fact that if I spend it all, there's nothing left for either of you to inherit, and therefore nothing left to go to charity? The will becomes irrelevant. Her fork froze midway to her mouth. She looked at me, not with fear, but with a cold sort of respect. You're scarier than I gave you credit for, Mom. I'm smarter than either of you gave me credit for, I replied. Now you get to learn the same lesson David is learning. I am not a problem to be solved or a resource to be managed. I am your mother, and I deserve better than manipulation disguised as concern. After Sarah left, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. I called James Morrison. Margaret, what's wrong? Jim, I need to ask you something. That protection plan Robert set up, was there more to it than just changing the will? James was quiet for a moment. What do you mean? I mean, did Robert anticipate that our children might try multiple strategies to manipulate me? His voice grew serious. Margaret, maybe you should come down to my office. There are some things we need to discuss in person. Chapter 7. The Abyss of Deceit. James Morrison's law office was on the second floor of a historic downtown building. As I walked up the creaking wooden stairs, I had a deep sense of foreboding. On his desk was a thick file labeled Thompson Family Trust, Confidential Provisions. Margaret, James began, before we go on, you need to know that everything I'm about to show you was Robert's idea. He made me promise not to reveal these details unless specific triggers were met. What kind of triggers? Evidence that either of your children was attempting to manipulate or defraud you. My mouth went dry. Defraud me? James opened the file. Inside was a stack of documents. Robert hired a private investigator 6 months before he died. He wanted to understand your family's true financial situation and their motivations. My heart felt like it stopped. He did what? Robert loved your children, Margaret, but he wasn't blind to their character flaws. He was particularly concerned about David's spending habits and Sarah's sense of entitlement. James spread copies of credit card statements, bank records, and mortgage documents across his desk. David and Claire aren't just struggling financially, they're drowning. They've refinanced their house twice, maxed out 6 credit cards, and taken loans against David's 401k. They're over $200,000 in consumer debt. I stared at the numbers, my head spinning. How did they hide this? Very carefully, but Robert's investigator was thorough. Sarah and Tom aren't much better. They're carrying $150,000 in debt, mostly from trying to maintain a lifestyle they can't afford. So their concern for my finances was really just a projection of their own desperation. They needed my inheritance badly. Without it, both families faced bankruptcy. James pulled out another folder. But that's not the worst part. My stomach clenched. There's worse. 3 months ago, David took out a life insurance policy on you, a big one. The room seemed to tilt. He what? $2 million, with him as the sole beneficiary. He listed himself as having an insurable interest because he was your caregiver and financially responsible for your welfare. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. A life insurance policy. On me. And it gets worse, James said, his voice low. The policy has a clause that pays double for accidental death. The voicemail suddenly made a terrible, horrifying kind of sense. It wasn't just wishing I would die. It was potentially incentivizing it. James slid one last document across the desk, a sealed envelope. This is a letter Robert wrote, to be opened only if evidence of fraud or potential harm emerged. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope marked, "For Margaret, if the worst happens." Inside was a single sheet of paper in Robert's careful handwriting. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means our children have shown their true colors. I am sorry I was right to be suspicious, and I am sorrier that you had to discover their betrayal. But I want you to know, you are not helpless. The investigator I hired continues to monitor the situation. If either David or Sarah has attempted to harm you financially or physically, evidence will be provided to the authorities. You are stronger than you know, smarter than they realize, and richer than they suspect. The account information at the bottom of this page will show you exactly how rich. Take control, my love. Show them that you're nobody's victim. Love always, Robert P.S. Check account 44,37291 at First National Bank. The password is rosegarden224. I looked up at James, tears welling in my eyes. Robert knew. He had known, and he had protected me, even from beyond the grave. "The question is," James said softly, "what do you want to do with this information?" I thought of David's tearful confession, of Sarah's casserole. It was all a performance staged by desperation and greed. I want to see the account Robert mentioned. James turned his computer screen toward me. When the account balance appeared, I gasped, $3,200,000. "Robert moved money throughout your marriage," James explained. "Small amounts, carefully invested, completely legally. He created a safety net that you could access if you ever needed to disappear or start over." "Disappear?" James's voice was grim. "Margaret, your son has a $4 million reason to see you dead, and your daughter knows about the policy. The investigator confirmed she was present when David applied for it. Both of them. They were both in on it." A cold, hard resolve formed in my mind. "Jim," I said, "I need you to arrange a family meeting, all of us, here in your office, as soon as possible." "Are you sure that's wise?" I smiled, a smile I didn't recognize as my own. "Oh, I'm very sure. It's time my children learnt that their mother is full of surprises." Chapter 8. The Showdown. The meeting was set for 2 p.m. I spent the morning preparing. I called Daniel Rivers, the private investigator Robert had hired. What he told me over the next hour turned my blood to ice. David hadn't just taken out the policy. He had been researching my health, my vitamins, and had even called my doctor's office, feigning concern about my mental competency. Sarah, more subtly, had been poisoning the well with family friends, suggesting I was becoming confused and paranoid, laying the groundwork to question my decision-making. Together, they had consulted a lawyer about having me declared incompetent. "Mrs. Thompson," Daniel said carefully, "I strongly advise against confronting them directly. If they're this desperate, a confrontation might accelerate their timeline. Mr. Rivers, my children may be greedy and manipulative, but they are not murderers. Ma'am, with all due respect, people with $2 million insurance policies and six-figure debts have killed for less." His words hung in the air, but I was resolved. I would not hide. At 2 p.m. sharp, I walked into James Morrison's conference room. David, Claire, Sarah, and Tom were already seated, looking uncomfortable. "Thank you all for coming," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. I thought it was time we had an honest family discussion. I nodded to James. He opened the first file. "David, would you like to explain to everyone why you took out a $2 million life insurance policy on me?" A stunned silence filled the room. Claire's face went white. Sarah's mouth dropped open. I don't know what you're talking about," David stammered. James slid the insurance documents across the table. "Policy number 707-49382, dated 3 months ago. Beneficiary, David Michael Thompson." David stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. "Mom, I can explain. It was for funeral expenses, estate taxes." "Estate taxes on what estate, David?" According to you, I'm spending all my money on frivolous travel. Sarah found her voice. David, please tell me you didn't actually do this. Sarah, you know about this policy, I said calmly. Mr. Rivers has photos of you at the insurance office with David when he applied. Sarah's face crumpled. Mom, it wasn't supposed to be like this. What was it supposed to be like, Sarah? You were desperate. You owed so much money and you thought if something happened to me, naturally, I repeated, but the policy pays double for accidents. I let that horrifying truth settle over them. But here's what you really need to know. Everything you think you understand about this situation is wrong. James opened the second file. Your mother is not the vulnerable widow you thought she was. Your father left your mother significantly wealthier than any of you realized. I watched their faces as James explained the hidden accounts, the careful investments, the safety net Robert had created. $3.2 million, James concluded, in addition to the house and the investments you already knew about. David looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. You've had over $3 million this whole time? Your father made sure I would never be dependent on anyone, including my own children. But why hide it? Sarah asked. Because, I said, standing and walking to the window, your father suspected this might happen. He wanted to see how you would behave if you thought I needed your help versus how you would behave if you thought I had money you couldn't access. And you failed the test, spectacularly. Tom, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. So, what about the hidden money, Margaret? What happens to it? Even now, after everything had been revealed, Sarah's husband was still thinking about the money. I turned back to face them. It goes wherever I decide it goes. And right now, I'm thinking it goes to people who see me as more than a dollar sign. Sarah began to cry again. Mom, please, we can fix this. Can you? Because right now, even after learning your brother took out a life insurance policy on me, your husband's first question was still about money. Finally, David looked up. Mom, what do you want from us? I want you to leave. Leave this office. Leave my life. Leave me alone. All of you. Forever, Sarah whispered. I looked at these people who had plotted against me, who had bet on my death, but they were still my children. Ask me again in 5 years, I said. If you can go 5 years without contacting me about money, inheritance, or anything related to my assets, maybe we can try again. As they prepared to leave, Sarah turned back one last time. Mom, for what it's worth, I do love you. Sarah, if you love me, then prove it. Prove it by leaving me alone to live my life without having to wonder if my own children are plotting against me. After they left, James asked how I felt. Lighter, I said, surprising myself. For the first time in months, I feel completely free. I decided not to press criminal charges. I thought being cut out of my life was punishment enough. I was wrong. Chapter 9. The finale of freedom. 3 months later, I was truly living. I had booked the trip to Ireland, enrolled in an Italian cooking class, and started volunteering at a local animal shelter. Life was peaceful, free of manipulative phone calls. That's when Daniel Rivers called, with information that changed everything. He had continued to monitor my children, and what he found was worse than before. They knew I had hired him. They had discovered my new activities, and they were still planning. He showed me text messages between David and Claire, between Sarah and Tom. If emotional manipulation didn't work, they would have to get creative. Tom had found out about my real net worth, and they were talking about an accident happening to a woman traveling alone. At that exact moment, my doorbell rang. It was Sarah and Tom. Daniel was on his phone instantly. This is Rivers. We need that backup now. I opened the door. Sarah was smiling, but it was a cold, calculating smile. Hi, Mom. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd drop by. They pushed past me into the living room, where Daniel was quickly packing his laptop. Who's this? Sarah asked, her voice sharp. A friend, I said. Tom studied Daniel. You look familiar. Have we met? After a few tense exchanges, their masks came off completely. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice no longer pleading, "we're not asking anymore. We're telling you." "We're your children," Tom added, "and we deserve security." "Security?" I repeated. "You mean my death?" Tom laughed, a chilling sound. "Well, you know about the insurance, but you don't understand. We're out of options." Just then, we heard the distant wail of sirens. Daniel smiled. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson isn't telling you anything, but she is pressing charges." As police cars pulled into my driveway, Tom and Sarah's expressions shifted from confidence to rage and panic. "You called the cops!" Sarah screamed, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this to us. We're family." I looked into my daughter's eyes and saw a complete stranger. "No, Sarah. Family doesn't plot murder for money." I stood there as my children and their spouses were handcuffed, while Daniel handed the police a thick file of evidence. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Dublin, writing postcards to friends back home. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from David, sent from prison. "Mom, I'm sorry for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. And sometimes that's exactly how it should be. As I sealed the postcard to my neighbour, describing the beauty of Ireland and my plans to see Scotland next, I realised that losing my children had been the most liberating experience of my life. Because for the first time in years, I was free to be myself, without worrying about who was plotting against me. And that, I decided, was worth more than any inheritance.